No role plays, just real. Chris and Lorenzo share 4 decades of combined experience to help you become a more effective leader.
We've never really, as a workforce, spent a lot of time on making sure we're developing good leaders.
We'll be able to share stories, experience, mistakes, failures, successes.
This is Hacking Your Leadership.
Welcome to Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Chris.
And I'm Lorenzo.
And Lorenzo, on this episode, I want to talk about an article from The Atlantic that I saw that is about a week old, but there's a specific part of it that I like a lot, and we can talk about the whole article. It's around how leaders can avoid their people getting burnt out, and we've talked about it before, but this takes some interesting points that we haven't really talked about that I like, that add a lot to the conversation compared to what we've talked about before, and so I think it's important to bring up. The article, like I said, is from The Atlantic. It's by an author named Caroline Nice, or Nice, N-Y-C-E. We'll post a link to it in the podcast description so you can check out the whole article. The article is basically a recap of an interview that the author had with a person named Jakada Amani, the CEO of a place called the Management Center. And this person offers some insights around what leaders can do to help employees avoid burnout. And one of the things that they brought up specifically is around having conversations with employees who you want to stay. And I thought this is a really interesting point because I know a lot of leaders don't even want to bring it up because they are afraid it will kind of like plant the seed in an employee's mind that they may want to leave, and they don't want to talk about it. What do you think about this?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great article, and it really highlights, I think, just a lot of the things that we talk about around communication, being proactive, building relationships, having, kind of leading the dialogue in such a way that it's an open space and that you can, share the things. And I think, what you were just mentioning is like kind of these old, antiquated ideas of like, we don't want to talk about this or we don't want to say that. And like to believe that it's not already being talked about or being said, amongst the team, like it's just silly. So I just really like the idea of kind of boiling it down to say like this is the human, we talk about like this is the human business. This is, what we do. And talking to people, finding out, like what are things that person might need individually, but what are things that we can take from that dialogue that we might be able to scale for other people in the organization. Like just having the ongoing engagements, I think, are so critical to not only building great culture, but then I think avoiding, people feeling like they're not being heard, they're getting burned out. They're getting stressed out at work. Like you should be able to catch on to some of those thoughts, feelings early on if you're having this level of dialogue with people throughout your team.
Right. I did some consulting work for an organization several years ago now, and one of the things that struck me positively was that when an email went out from the CEO, it was, the signature line at the bottom of the email that went to the whole company had the cell phone number of the CEO in the signature line. And I thought that was a good symbolic kind of move, because the idea that you would just pick up the phone and call the CEO probably doesn't dawn on many people. And I don't know that person ever received many calls to their cell phone from employees because it was there. But having it there sends a message that, hey, you know what? If you wanted to, you could. Right? It's this kind of open door policy. And I liked that so much that one of the things that I tried to do in this organization was have an actual company directory from the home office employees put out to all of the non-home office employees that included cell phone numbers, work phone numbers, extensions, all that stuff. And that might seem like, well, why not? Why wouldn't you have that? And that's what my thought was too. But there was some pushback from some leaders in the organization that said, no, we don't want that. If they have an issue, they can send an email to us. And it oftentimes wasn't clear who you would send an email to if there was an issue. And so having kind of like a main directory that said, this is what each person does, and this is how to get a hold of them, I thought was a positive thing. And eventually a couple of people came to me kind of personally and said, hey, we just need to be straight with you. This is why we don't want it. This is why we don't want this directory. And it's because there are 10,000 employees in this organization who don't work for the home office. These are store level employees, and we can't have hundreds of them calling us a day on our cell phones, what if we're with our families or we're not at work or whatever it is, that this can't happen. And my response to that was, well, one, they're not going to. Like it's not about whether or not they're going to, it's about whether or not they believe they could if they needed to. And the vast majority of them aren't going to, number one. But number two, and more importantly, if there was an issue that was so huge that hundreds of employees independently felt the need to call you on your cell phone, wouldn't you want to know about it? Like if it rose to that level, wouldn't you want to know? And it was just like deer in headlights stares right back. And eventually it was quashed. Like I couldn't get that done. The organization said, no, we're not going to put out a directory of home office employee phone numbers to the non-home office people. And it took a while for a lot of those changes to eventually happen and for the culture to change. But this is the exact same thing. This is do your people have the impression that if there's an issue, they can come to you about it? And most of them won't, because they'll figure out other ways to do it. They'll talk to whoever their closer friends are or their direct leader or whatever it is. But knowing that they can sends a message that is important to send to your people. And I think this is what a lot of this article touches on is the symbolic nature of having the whatever the open door policy is, combined with an intentional kind of prompting of the conversation, saying, hey, reach out if you have an issue. I want to talk to you if you have an issue. That's so important to making people understand that if they start to feel burnt out, it's not a problem they have to solve on their own.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great point. And another part of the article that I really liked is they talk about, like, how do you know if someone is burned out? And they discuss things like productivity, taking a huge dive, missing deadlines, things like that. But there's a part of this that I like, that it's something that I had heard before previously and never really put these things together, which is kind of like checking in with people and things like, how was your weekend? Or what have you been up to last couple of weeks? Or, how's been time with the family? Or, what are some of the things that you've done recently? And listening to see what those responses are. Are they active? Are they... does it sound like it's enjoyable, or is it like, I was so tired, I just slept, not a lot, just kind of like same old, like those types of things, I think can be really good elements of flags to say there's probably some dialogue that needs to happen here, or let me check in a little bit deeper, or let me see what's going on, or let me spend, let's pull some time together. Because in again, like this proactive approach to the dialogue of saying something like, hey, Chris, I know, last couple times that we've checked in, you've kind of mentioned just kind of being, overwhelmed or tired, or just kind of like not really getting out and doing some of the things. Like, I want to talk about that. Like, I want to make sure that you get some time to not only relax and rest, but to enjoy some hobbies, and it doesn't feel like maybe you're getting some of that time. Is there something here that we can talk about, or what's the workload feel like? And just starting to open up that conversation for you to be like, what, you're right. Like, it's just been a lot of work the last, month or so. I've been overwhelmed. I've had a lot that we have to get this done, or this has been a real stressful part of what's going on. Just having that conversation, I think, can be so helpful to say, all right, well, let's make some plans then. What can we take off your plate? What can we adjust? How can I help support you? And then I think all of a sudden you may feel supported in a way that you may have never asked for that support. You may have never said anything. You would have just kind of gotten, potentially burned out. You may have just gotten just over the work and either had to take a very long time away, or maybe quit, or whatever. Like, so I just like this idea of checking in with people, but then the intention behind the follow-up of the dialogue, just to make sure that there's something as a leader that you might be able to do that could really put them in a much better spot.
Yeah, the first thing I thought of when you were giving that example is that I have worked for leaders who, if they tried to have that conversation with me about how my weekend was, how my family is, and if the response from me was that, I just kind of slept all weekend, or like I'm, things that would lead to an impression of burnout, that the next thing that they said around trying to mitigate that or trying to help that, for me, for some leaders, it would come off very poorly, and for some leaders it would come off very positively. And the difference between the two is what work and effort and time had been put into the relationship up to that point prior to that incident happening. And so I think it's incumbent upon leaders to start these conversations with people when everything is fine, when you don't have an impression or you're not getting the impression there's a problem. If the squeaky wheel gets the grease in your organization and you don't say anything to an employee when it looks like they have their head down and they're going forward and their productivity is fine, and you say nothing, then you likely will not have the clout or the capital invested in the relationship to the point to be able to have these tough conversations with them should the need arise. And so this isn't something that can wait. You have to have it. You have to have it from the very beginning. One of the questions that the author asks this person is this concept of talking to an employee and asking them outright, I know there's a lot of turnover right now. I would like for you to stay for the next year or more. What would it take to do that? And she kind of incredulously responds with, you would ask that directly to a person? Absolutely. If they're a high-performing individual and I want them to stay, to not ask a question like that is avoiding the elephant in the room, hoping that it goes away. And it's like, well, what if they say that what it would take for me to stay is I want you to double my salary? What if they go like, oh my gosh, ooh, this is the money train's coming in, and they start asking for things that you can't provide? Well, then you just tell them that. You tell them that's not, I can't, that's not within my power. Here's what is in my power. Here's what we can do. But the goal is that I want you to know that your work is valuable and that it is important to me that you stay, and whatever I can do to make that happen, I will do. And whatever I can't do, I'll be honest with you and I'll tell you that. But this idea that by not saying it, or this idea by asking a question in that way, or by having the conversation, will somehow start this internal dialogue in the employee's head of, ooh, I never thought about leaving before. Maybe there's more out there. My manager really wants me to stay. How can I milk this cow for all it's worth? If you think that an employee has not thought about what the possibilities are elsewhere already before you've had this conversation, then you're naive. That people are always thinking that. They're always thinking, what can I do to further my career, or to do more for my family, or to make me more likely to accomplish this goal? These conversations are happening inside employees' heads all the time. And so for you to avoid them is the wrong thing. For you to openly say, let's have this conversation about it, all that says is that what's important to them is also important to you, and whatever you can do, you will.
Yeah, I think it's great. And honestly, I know we do a lot of episodes just around content that we read and articles and things like that, and we always include the link in the in the description so that we can always credit the authors. But this one specifically, there's so many great gems in this interview and this dialogue that I appreciate that you're also kind of quoting from the article, because I think it's important that we do. Because like I said, I think that we can talk about this in concepts, but some of these words that Imani uses, he says in one of the other, like the answers of the last part of the article, he says all the stuff around quiet quitting and the general back in the day grumbling is a failure of leadership. And you know how I love to use that phrase because it just gets everybody's attention. And he says, and it's a failure of imagination. Because you have to lead the actual team you actually have, not the team you want. And so basically, if you have this imagination of the people that are on your team that work in a certain way or that a certain way, he says, you're not leading them, you're leading your imagination. And I'm just like, that's so damn good. It's so real. Like we talk a lot about self-development and, looking at ourselves in the mirror and like, are we living to the person that we actually are, or are we believing that we are the aspirational version of ourselves? Like that element of intellectual honesty and considering these things is, I think, so important in these spaces, because I think a lot of times with leaders, we can get caught up in that element of ego. We can get caught up in this idea of what we think and believe that if we lead that way, or if we demand this type of thing, that magically we're just going to get there. And we ignore the fact that we have to meet people where they're at, and we have to lead the people that we have. And that may require us to show up in different ways in different places. And that's critical. So I really appreciate his comments here.
Yeah. If I said to myself, I need a house and I'm going to build it, that's fine. I can build a house and I can live in it. But if all of a sudden along the way I say, you know what, this is really, really hard, I don't think I can do this. Instead, I'm going to build a birdhouse. That's a lot easier. And it is. It's a lot easier to build that birdhouse. But I'm not going to be able to live in it. Like I can't tell myself I'm still going to live in this house after it's built. if I've just built a birdhouse. This is the exact same thing. If you are leading the team of people you want to have, because if that were the team you were leading, it would make your leadership life a lot easier, because the things that they need are the things that are inherently easy for you to provide. They're an inherently easy bunch of people to lead. Then all you're doing is creating something out of thin air, thinking that you can now make your job easier by leading in this way. And all that will do is push them further away, and they will start to leave. And then you'll go, "What? Why are they leaving? I'm doing everything that I can do." No, you're doing everything you can do for the team that you wish you had, right? But you're not doing everything for the team that you actually do have. And that will take some imagination, as Imani puts it, and thinking outside the box of what can I change about myself and my own leadership style, if that is what is needed to keep a person engaged and working hard and staying with an organization because they produce well. They do well for the organization, and I want them around. What am I willing to do to make that happen? And if I'm not willing to change that, if I'm not willing to change something about myself and the way I lead in order to meet them where they are to get them to stay, then that's a decision. And that's fine. If you want to go that route, just know that they'll be more likely to leave because of it. I recently had a conversation with an employee who gave some feedback to another employee, and they thought the conversation went really well. And they found out later that an hour after their conversation, the employee left work for the day in tears and didn't come to work the next day. And the conversation that I had with this employee who kind of gave the feedback was in the context of looking back. And, I wasn't there for the conversation where they gave the feedback, so I don't know what was said. They tried to kind of like replay it for me, and the way they described it, nothing was said that was inherently negative. And if that's true, if the way they structured the feedback conversation was exactly how they should, then my response to that would be, there's no way then that your feedback conversation is what did it. It was the straw. And there was other things that were building up. There were other things that were happening in this employee's life that no one had the conversation with them about earlier. No one reached out to them and said, what can we do to mitigate stress? And you just happened to be the last layer that caused them to go, you know what, enough is enough, I'm done. Or you were terrible at the conversation, and that could be it too. When you hear a story, you're only hearing one side of the story. So that's equally possible. But if they are, and I know this person has a good heart, and they typically do the right thing. And so if I take their word for it, then all I can assume is that this person had a lot on their plate before this conversation. And that's what this is about. This is about making sure that there's never a situation where a single straw can cause a person to have that much of an over-the-top reaction. Because if they are, it means it was building for a long time. And if you're in leadership, it's your responsibility to make sure that those things aren't building over time, that you're mitigating them in the moments that they're happening so that they don't build.
Absolutely. And with that, it brings us to this episode's 1 Minute Hack. But first, a few words from our sponsors.
The 1 Minute Hack.
All right, for this episode's 1 Minute Hack, here's what I want you to do. Get out your pen and paper, and I want you to write down a list of the things that you as a leader have the ability to do for your people in terms of helping them accomplish their goals, benefits that your organization can offer, anything that can make them either see the value in staying or be more likely to stay. Write all those things down, and then also write down the things that you absolutely cannot do, so you kind of have those in the back of your mind. And I want you to intentionally have these conversations with every one of the people who report up to you. Sit down with them and say, all of your top performers, I value your productivity. I value your hard work and your effort. I think you do really well for this organization, and I want you to stay. I know that people are doing a lot of job hopping and a lot of switching right now, and they're kind of looking for whatever else is out there. And I'm not saying you shouldn't do that. Please do that. Whatever's best for you is what you should do. but I want to make sure that you know that you're valued here and that I want you to stay. And if there's something that can be done to make sure that happens, I want you to have the conversation with me before you make any decisions. I want to sit down and talk with you and make sure you know that this is what we can do here in this organization. This is what you may not be taking advantage of that you could take advantage of. All of these things that might make your decision to stay or go more likely to make you want to stay. So you are valued, and I do want you around. Don't avoid those conversations. Be proactive about them, and you'll have a lot more people who at least take you up on it, and they'll be more likely to stay, because typically when they come to you and say, hey, I'm thinking about leaving, they may have already taken the job.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great woman to hack. And to your point earlier on, just the ongoing dialogue allows you to have a connection point with people and with your people that allows you to understand what's going on in their lives, how they're feeling, and how they're feeling about the work. And I love the idea of the proactive, like, let's talk about the future conversation, because I think that also shows a feeling of value and provides a sense of confidence with people to know that, like, hey, my leader feels good about the work that I'm doing. My leader is thinking about, me staying, and what does that look like? And I think that those typically are really, good conversations is the outcome of those conversations. So yeah, I feel good about that. I think it's a good hack, and just a constant reminder of this day and age with connection being such an important thing, that you're looking to figure out ways to connect with people at all places.
Yeah, this is leadership in general, though. Like, this is not just about trying to mitigate the burnout or mitigate the potential of somebody leaving an organization. This is what should be happening all the time anyway. And the result of it is that less people will leave over time and more people will stay being high performers. Less people have burnout. This is what you do every single day. If you approach this from the standpoint of, I'm doing this in order to avoid these things happening, I think that's the wrong way to look at it. It's something you need to approach from a standpoint of, this is my job as a leader, and then just trust that the outcomes will be there versus not doing it. Because if your people get the impression you're only doing it because you want them to stay and not because you just value them and you like them as an individual, I think it will come across as hollow, and they'll be less likely to believe what you're telling them to begin with.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that, it brings us to the end of this episode. This is Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Lorenzo.
And I'm Chris.
And we'll talk to you all next time.